The letter arrived on a Tuesday, which somehow made it worse. Not a Friday, when I could have spent the weekend falling apart in private. Not a Monday, when the shock might have blended into the general misery of the work week. A Tuesday. I was sitting at my desk at the firm with 3 open spreadsheets and a half-eaten granola bar when my personal email pinged. I almost didn't open it. I almost let it sit there until lunch. The subject line was from the Internal Revenue Service. It read, "Final notice unpaid tax liability, immediate response required." I am a forensic accountant. I have spent the last 8 years of my career finding money that other people tried to hide. I know what IRS final notices look like. I know the weight of them. And I know, with the absolute certainty of someone who files her own returns 4 weeks early every single year, that I had never in my life received one. My name is Diane. I am 32 years old. I live alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in Denver that I chose specifically because it was mine, my lease, my name on the mailbox, my spider plant on the windowsill, nobody else's. I opened the email. The IRS was notifying me of an unpaid tax liability connected to a sole proprietorship registered in my name, Callaway Creative Solutions, LLC. According to their records, this business had generated over $180,000 in income across the previous 2 tax years. None of it had been reported. The total liability, with penalties and interest, came to $74,000. I had never heard of Callaway Creative Solutions in my life. I sat very still for a long moment. My granola bar sat half-eaten on a napkin beside my keyboard. Outside my office window, Denver looked exactly the same as it always did. The mountains were still there. The sky was still blue. Everything was exactly where I had left it, and yet the floor had just dropped out from under my entire life. Have you ever discovered that someone you loved had been using your name while you weren't looking? Leave your story in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone in this. My hands were steady when I picked up my phone. That surprised me. I expected them to shake. Instead, I felt something settle into place behind my sternum, cold and quiet and very, very focused. I had spent 8 years tracking financial fraud for corporations and law firms. I had reconstructed shell companies from nothing but a post-it note and a gut feeling. I knew exactly what I was looking at. Someone had registered a business under my name, run money through it, and left me to pay the bill. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my sister. I did what I always do when the situation is worse than it looks. I called the one person I knew who was better at this than me. Her name is Patricia. She is a tax attorney, and she once described her specialty as financial archaeology, digging through the dirt other people buried people in. I had referred 3 clients to her over the years. She owed me lunch at minimum. When she picked up and heard my voice, she said, "Diane, why do you sound like that? I need you to pull the registration documents for a business called Callaway Creative Solutions," I said. "It's filed under my name and social security number. I've never heard of it. The IRS is saying I owe $74,000 on income I never earned." Silence. Then the sound of typing. "Give me 20 minutes, she said, and hung up. I spent those 20 minutes being methodical. I printed the IRS notice. I pulled my own credit report, the one I run quarterly because I am a forensic accountant and paranoia is a professional habit. 3 new lines of credit in the past 18 months. 2 store cards and a personal loan. None of them mine. Total exposure, just over $40,000, on top of the tax liability. Someone had been very busy. Patricia called back in 17 minutes. Her voice had changed in the way voices do when the news has moved from bad to serious. "The business was registered 14 months ago," she said. "Colorado Secretary of State. The registered agent is a woman named Verna Callaway." The name hit me like stepping off a curb I didn't see. Verna Callaway was my mother's name before she remarried. It was the name she stopped using 20 years ago. It was the name almost nobody knew. Almost. "Patricia," I said. My voice came out completely flat. "I need you to file a fraud affidavit with the IRS today. I need a credit freeze on all 3 bureaus immediately. And I need to know everything, every account, every card, every loan, every line of credit that has my name attached to it, anywhere in this state." "Diane, all of it," I said. "I need the full picture." "Okay," she said. "I'll start now. But I need you to tell me something first. Who else knew your social security number?" I closed my eyes. I thought about the list of people in my life who had ever had access to that number. It was the kind of short that tells you everything you need to know about who you're dealing with. "My mother," I said, "and my sister." I drove home that evening and sat on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinets. Not because I was falling apart, I want to be clear about that. I sat on the floor because it was solid, because I needed to feel something real and immovable under me while I thought. My sister's name is Renata. She is 4 years older than me and has been, for as long as I can remember, the one who my mother looked at when she talked about potential. Renata had the personality, the charm, the social grace. I had the grades, the discipline, the CPA license. Our mother called Renata gifted and called me reliable, and for a long time, I thought those were equal compliments. I was wrong. Reliable, I had learned over 32 years, is not a compliment in a family like ours. Reliable means you are a resource. It means you will show up. It means when the car needs a new transmission and Renata doesn't have the money, I will. It means when the rent is short 1 month, just this month, Diane, I promise it won't happen again, I will cover it. It means when my mother's roof needed repairs and the contractor needed a check before he'd start, my number was the one they called. I paid. I always paid. Not because I had unlimited money, I didn't, but because I had been trained since childhood to understand that being the capable one meant being the one who handled it, and the one who handles it doesn't get to say no. I sat on my kitchen floor, and I added it up. Not emotionally, I'm not built that way. I added it up the way I add up everything, methodically, without sentiment. The car repair, the rent gap, the roof, the loan I'd co-signed for Renata's brand consulting business that had never had a single client. The personal loan I'd taken out 2 years ago that I thought was for my own emergency fund but had somehow, in the paperwork I'd signed at my mother's kitchen table, I've been partially redirected into an account I'd never seen. I had been their balance sheet, their safety net, their silent investor in a family that performed stability while I quietly subsidized every crack in the foundation. My phone buzzed. A text from Renata. Hey, Di. Mom says you've been asking weird questions about finances. Everything okay? A minute later, from my mother. Diane, call me right now. You're worrying your sister. I looked at those texts for a long time. I noticed there was no question about whether I was okay. No curiosity about what had upset me. Just management. Just damage control. Moving in immediately, before I could do anything they couldn't predict. I put my phone face down on the kitchen floor and thought about all the times in my adult life I had given them the benefit of the doubt. All the times I had told myself that they weren't strategic. They were just struggling. That they weren't using me. They just didn't know how to ask for help in a healthy way. That if I could just be patient enough, generous enough, present enough, eventually the scales would balance. The scales were never going to balance. They had never been designed to. I picked my phone back up and texted Patricia, find everything. Don't stop until you have all of it. Then I went to bed. I slept 6 hours, which is what I always sleep. In the morning, I went back to work. Patricia called me 3 days later and asked me to come to her office. Her voice on the phone was the particular kind of careful that lawyers use when they are about to tell you something that will change how you see your own life. I sat across from her in a glass-walled conference room and she laid it out for me in order, the way I would have done it for a client. The business, Callaway Creative Solutions, had been running for 14 months. In that time, it had billed several small companies for creative consulting services, vague enough to be nearly impossible to dispute, specific enough to look legitimate on paper. The income had flowed through a business account, and from there into 2 personal accounts. One belonged to Renata, the other belonged to my mother. The fraud affidavit we'd filed had triggered a deeper audit. What the auditor found underneath the shell company was worse. My name appeared as a co-borrower on a commercial line of credit for $120,000, drawn down almost entirely. The signature on that document was mine, or rather, it was a very good copy of mine. The kind you can produce when you've had access to someone's signature on years of family paperwork. There's something else, Patricia said. She had a folder in front of her that she hadn't opened yet. We pulled the chain of documentation for the business registration. The person who notarized the original filings, the one who certified that you were present and consenting, his name is Gerald Marsh. I didn't recognize the name. He's a notary out of Colorado Springs, Patricia said. But he also has a prior relationship with your family. He notarized your mother's second marriage certificate. And 6 years ago, he notarized the dissolution documents for a partnership called Marsh Callaway Design Group. I went still. That was my father's company, I said. My father left when I was 9 years old. That is the version of events I grew up with. My mother told it consistently, in the particular tone she used for stories about people who had failed her. He couldn't handle responsibility. He couldn't handle the pressure of a family. He walked out and never looked back. By the time I was 12, I had absorbed this story so completely that I stopped asking questions about him. By the time I was 20, he was a closed chapter. A cautionary tale about men who run from the things that matter. Patricia, I said slowly. Gerald Marsh was my father's business partner? Was, she said, until the partnership dissolved. According to the filing, your father signed over his share of the company under duress. She paused. The witness on that document is your mother. The conference room was very quiet. He didn't leave, I said. It wasn't a question. I could hear it already, underneath what she was saying, the shape of a different story. I can't tell you what happened between your parents, Patricia said carefully. What I can tell you is that Gerald Marsh called my office this morning. He says he has documentation he's been holding for 23 years. And he wants to meet with you. I drove to Colorado Springs the next morning. I told myself I was going as a professional, not as a daughter. I told myself I would hear what he had to say and evaluate it the way I evaluated everything on evidence, not emotion. Gerald Marsh was in his late 60s, with the kind of face that had done a lot of quiet worrying over many years. He met me at the door of a small office above a dry cleaner and shook my hand without preamble. He looked at me for a moment the way people look at you when they're checking you against a memory. You have his eyes, he said. Your father's. I need you to tell me everything, I said. From the beginning. So he did. My father had not left. My father had been pushed. The partnership, Marsh Callaway Design Group, had been his idea, his vision, built from scratch over 7 years. When things went wrong between him and my mother, she had gone to a lawyer before he knew there was anything to go to a lawyer about. She had leveraged the community property laws, the joint accounts, the fact that her name was on the business filings, to present him with a choice: sign over the partnership and walk away from the legal fight, or spend the next decade in litigation that would cost more than the business was worth. He had a 9-year-old daughter. He chose to walk away from the fight rather than drag that child through years of courtroom warfare. He signed the dissolution papers. My mother kept the business assets, dissolved the partnership, and told everyone, including me, that he had abandoned us. He never stopped trying to reach you, Gerald said. He opened the folder he had been holding. He sent letters for years. I don't know if you ever received them. I had not received them. He passed away 4 years ago, Gerald said. Pancreatic cancer. He was gone in 3 months. He paused. Before he died, he gave me a document. He made me promise to hold it until either you came looking or something happened that made it necessary to use it. He slid the document across the desk. It was a letter. My father's handwriting, I had never seen it before. And yet somehow I recognized something in it. Something in the way the letters leaned forward. Purposeful and a little impatient. The letter was addressed to me. It laid out, in careful and specific language, the truth of what had happened. It also described something else, a clause in the original partnership agreement, drafted before things had gone wrong, that had never been voided. A clause that stated that if either partner or their heirs could demonstrate that the dissolution had been obtained through misrepresentation or coercion, the terms could be revisited and any assets still traceable to the original partnership could be reclaimed. The family home, the one my mother had kept, the one I had helped pay the property taxes on for 3 years when she claimed she was short. It was traceable. Gerald had the records. Why now? I asked. My voice was steady. Why come forward now? Because she used your name, he said. Your father could accept what she did to him. He was an adult. He made a choice. But he made me promise that if she ever turned what she'd done to him onto you, I was done staying quiet. I sat with that for a while. I thought about my father, a man I had been taught to dismiss, making a promise to a friend about protecting a daughter he was never allowed to see. I thought about the letters I never received. I thought about all the years I had paid to keep a family system running that had been built on a lie about why it needed keeping. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was not grief exactly, or not only grief. It was the particular sensation of a very heavy thing finally being named, like the pressure change when a storm system moves through. Gerald, I said, I need the original partnership documents, every page, and I need you to be willing to provide a sworn affidavit to my attorney. Already drafted, he said, and slid a second folder across the desk. Patricia filed everything in one motion. The fraud affidavit with the IRS, the formal dispute of the fraudulent credit lines, the coercion claim against the partnership dissolution, and a civil fraud complaint against my mother and Renata in connection with Callaway Creative Solutions. She called me afterward and said, in the tone of someone who does not often allow herself to sound impressed, Diane, in 15 years of practice, I have never had a case where the client was also capable of building half of it themselves. I know where to look, I said. I just didn't know to look here. The asset freeze hit them both within 48 hours. My mother called 11 times in one day. I did not answer. Renata sent a series of texts that moved in the space of 2 hours, from casual to confused to panicked. I read all of them. I did not respond to any of them. On the 4th day, my mother showed up at my apartment. I heard the knock and looked through the peephole. She was standing in the hallway in a coat I had helped her pay for. I remembered the charge, $340 on a store card she'd put in my name 3 years ago and never paid off. Her hair was perfect. Her posture was straight. Whatever was happening inside her, the surface was still composed, still performing. That was her particular gift. She could be falling apart entirely, and her exterior would hold like plaster. I opened the door, not wide. I stood in the gap with my hand on the frame and I looked at her. "Diane," she said. Her voice was warm in the way that voices are warm when warmth is being used as a tool. "This has gone on long enough. You need to call off your lawyer. You're destroying this family over a bookkeeping misunderstanding." "Come in," I said, and stepped back. She walked in and looked around my apartment the way she always did, cataloging, assessing, searching for some small inadequacy she could soften later with a comment that sounded like concern. She sat down on my couch without being invited to. "Your sister is devastated," she said. "She doesn't understand why you're doing this. After everything we've been through together as a family." "Tell me about Gerald Marsh," I said. Something crossed her face, just for a second, and then it was gone, plastered over with a new expression, confusion, manufactured and smooth. "I don't know what he's been telling you," she said. "That man has a grudge against this family going back decades. He was furious when the partnership dissolved. He's been waiting for an opportunity to—" "He has the original partnership documents," I said. "Signed, notarized, with the coercion clause. He also has 23 years of my father's correspondence, including the letters you intercepted." She was quiet for a moment. The plaster held, but I could see the work it was taking. "Your father was not a good man," she said finally. Her voice had changed. It was softer now, practiced. The tone she used when she wanted me to feel like she was confiding something painful. "I protected you from a lot about him. I made sacrifices for you that you don't know about. I know that he signed away his share of the company so I wouldn't have to watch my parents go to war in a courtroom," I said. "I know that he sent letters I never received. I know that he died 4 years ago and no one told me." She opened her mouth. "I also know," I said, keeping my voice level, "that you registered a business under my name and social security number. That you ran $180,000 through it and left me to answer to the IRS. That you forged my signature on a $120,000 line of credit, and that you have been building debt in my name for at least 3 years. We needed the money," she said. The warmth was gone. What was underneath it was something I had glimpsed before in moments when she thought I wasn't paying attention. A flat, cold pragmatism. You have the income. You have the credit. You weren't using it. "It wasn't yours to use," I said. "You're my daughter." "I'm your daughter," I agreed. "Not your bank account. Not your safety net. Not your backup plan." She shifted on the couch. I watched her cycle through her options. Sympathy hadn't worked. Guilt was next. I could see it loading. "I did everything for you," she said, and her voice cracked on the last word, perfectly timed. "I raised you alone. I sacrificed my career, my opportunities. I gave you everything I had, and this is how. You raised me on money from a business you took from my father," I said. "And when that ran out, you started taking from me. The sequence is consistent." She stood up. The tears stopped as quickly as they'd started. "You are going to regret this," she said. "When this is over and you've destroyed your own family, you are going to have no one." I walked to the door and held it open. "I had no one for a long time already," I said. "I just didn't know it yet." She left. I closed the door behind her, not with force, just firmly, the way you close a door when you mean it, and stood in my apartment for a long moment listening to the quiet. Then I picked up my phone and changed my building's door code. The civil hearing was not dramatic in the way that courts are dramatic on television. It was precise. Patricia had built the case the way I would have built it. Methodical, documented, without a single unnecessary word. Exhibit 1. The IRS final notice, dated and time-stamped, connected to a business I had never authorized. Exhibit 2. The business registration documents for Callaway Creative Solutions, bearing my name and social security number, with notarization by Gerald Marsh, who appeared by video affidavit to testify that he had notarized the documents under false pretense, believing the signature to be genuine, and to provide his full statement regarding the history of the partnership dissolution. Exhibit 3. the forensic analysis of the business account, showing the income flow from the shell company directly into accounts controlled by my mother and Renata. Exhibit 4. The forged credit line documents, with a side-by-side comparison of my actual signature pulled from my legitimate tax filings against the forgery. The difference, the forensic document examiner testified, was detectable in the pressure pattern and the angle of the pen. Exhibit 5. My father's letter. The partnership clause. 23 years of correspondence, stacked and labeled and entered into evidence. Renata cried throughout. She was crying the way she had always cried when things went wrong, loudly, visibly, as though the volume of her distress should be sufficient to resolve the situation in her favor. I watched her and I tried to find something in myself that felt like sympathy. I found something closer to sadness. Not for what she was losing, but for the fact that she had never been taught that there was any other way to operate in the world. My mother sat perfectly still. She did not cry. She watched the exhibits go up, and she was quiet in the way that a person is quiet when they are finally, truly out of moves. The judge was a woman in her 50s with reading glasses, and the particular expression of someone who has seen a very great deal of human behavior and has stopped being surprised by any of it. She read through the summary judgment documents without comment. Then she looked up. The court finds that the defendant used the plaintiff's personal identifying information to establish a fraudulent business entity and to obtain credit under false pretense, she said. The IRS liability attributable to the fraudulent business will be discharged from the plaintiff and reassigned accordingly. The fraudulent lines of credit will be removed from the plaintiff's credit history in full. She set down the documents. Regarding the civil fraud complaint and the challenge to the original partnership dissolution, the court finds the coercion claim credible and the documentation sufficient. The family property in question will be subject to a separate valuation proceeding to determine the appropriate remedy. She looked at my mother. My mother looked back at her. Miss Calloway, the judge said, I want you to understand that this court takes identity fraud seriously, regardless of the relationship between the parties. You will be hearing from the district attorney's office. I would strongly advise you to secure competent criminal defense counsel. My mother said nothing. Renata made a sound beside her. I looked at my hands on the table in front of me and thought about Gerald Marsh and the folder he had kept for 23 years. I thought about a man who had made a promise about a little girl he'd never met. I thought about letters that had been written and never arrived. That evening, Patricia met me outside the courthouse. She handed me a manila envelope. Gerald asked me to give you this, she said. He said it wasn't evidence. He said it was yours. I opened it on the steps of the courthouse in the October afternoon light. Inside was a photograph. It was me, maybe 7 years old, gap-toothed, at a birthday party I didn't remember, and crouching next to me, with his hand on my shoulder and his eyes crinkled at the corners from laughing, was a man I had never consciously known. He had my eyes, or I had his. On the back of the photograph, in his handwriting, were 4 words. She figured it out. I have thought about those 4 words many times since. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a legal pad and went through everything. Not the case documents, those were Patricia's domain now. What I went through was the running tally I had kept in my head for years. All the money I'd given, all the favors I'd extended, all the times I'd answered the phone at 11 at night and said yes, before I'd even heard the question. I added it up one last time. Not to feel sorry for myself, and not to feel angry. I added it up to set it down, to look at it clearly and completely, and then let it be what it was. A record of choices made by a person who had been taught that her value was in what she could provide. I tore the page out of the legal pad. I held it over the sink and burned it with a lighter I kept in the junk drawer. I watched it go. My apartment was very quiet and very mine. I thought about my father writing letters that never arrived. I thought about him making a choice to protect me from a war by removing himself from the battlefield, without knowing that the war would simply find a different way to consume me. I thought about Gerald Marsh driving to Colorado Springs to meet a stranger who turned out to be less of a stranger than she knew. I thought about my mother, who had built an entire identity on being the one who was wronged, and had spent 20 years making sure everyone around her had reasons to need her, so she could go on being the one who was wronged when they didn't appreciate it enough. I thought about Renata, who had grown up watching that system work and had simply assumed it would go on working forever. There is a particular kind of grief that comes when you understand something about your family that cannot be undone. It is not the same as losing someone. It is more like discovering that the map you've been navigating by was drawn to serve someone else's interests, and every road on it was designed to bring you back to the same place. The grief is real, and it is also, underneath it, a strange and specific relief. Because once you see the map for what it is, you can put it down. I had spent 32 years being the reliable one, the one who showed up, who covered the gap, who answered the call. I had mistaken that for being loved. I had confused being needed with being valued. I had confused the weight of their dependence for the weight of belonging. They were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing. What I know now, what I am still learning how to carry, is that being capable of holding things up does not mean you were built to hold everyone else up forever. It means you have the strength to hold yourself, to build something of your own, to decide, finally and completely, what structure you actually want to live inside. I enrolled in a ceramics class the week after the hearing, not because I had any particular interest in ceramics, because I wanted to spend an hour a week making something with my hands that had nothing to do with numbers or documents or other people's financial disasters. I wanted to make something that was only mine, that I could hold up to the light and say, I made this, just for the sake of making it. The instructor was a woman in her 60s who had been teaching the class for 20 years. On the first night, she watched me work and then said, without particular drama, "You're fighting the clay. You have to let it show you where it wants to go." I thought about that on the drive home. The next session, I let it show me. There is a version of this story where I tell you that I came out of it without scars, that the legal victory made everything clean, that I walked away feeling only righteous satisfaction. That version would be simpler. It would also be a lie. The truth is that I still sometimes pick up my phone and start to type a text to my mother before I remember. The truth is that I still sometimes feel the pull of old patterns, the instinct to anticipate someone's need, to preemptively solve a problem that isn't mine. The truth is that knowing where a habit comes from does not make the habit disappear overnight. But here's the other truth, the one I am still getting used to. For most of my life, I thought that being responsible for everyone else was the price of belonging to something. I thought that if I could just be useful enough, present enough, capable enough, the transaction would eventually become something it had never been designed to be. It would become love, real love, the kind that doesn't cost you anything. It doesn't work that way. You cannot purchase that kind of belonging with enough years of picking up the bill. Some families are not a home you live in. They are a role you are assigned. And the difference between a home and a role is that a home is yours, and a role is only ever in service of someone else's story. Cutting yourself out of a role is not betrayal. It is the beginning of finding out who you actually are when nobody is asking you to be anything else. I have my father's eyes. I have Gerald Marsh's photograph on my desk. I have a small, lopsided ceramic bowl on my windowsill, next to the spider plant, my first one, still imperfect, made with hands that were learning to stop fighting what they were working with. I have my name, fully mine now, not registered anywhere I didn't sign, not attached to anything I didn't choose. For the first time in my life, that is enough. More than enough. It is everything. Thank you for sitting with this story. If you have ever had to disentangle your name, your real name, the one that belongs to you, from something someone else built with it, I want to hear from you in the comments. And if this reached someone who needed it today, please pass it on. Hit like if you know what it feels like to finally stop subsidizing a story that was never yours to begin with.